On October 24, 1960, a missile sitting on a launch pad in the Soviet Union caught fire and exploded. The men who died were not given funerals their families could attend. Their names were not published. The official story was that Marshal Mitrofan Nedelin had died in a plane crash. That lie held for nearly 30 years. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what happened that day at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, who made the decisions that caused it, and how the Soviet state buried the truth alongside the bodies. Baikonur, located in what is now Kazakhstan, was established in 1955. It became the most active launch site in the world, responsible for putting Sputnik into orbit in 1957 and sending Yuri Gagarin into space in 1961. More than 1,500 space launches have been conducted from that ground. But before Gagarin's historic flight, before any of those celebrated milestones, something happened at Baikonur that the Soviet government spent 3 decades pretending never occurred. To understand why it happened, you have to understand the pressure the Soviet space and military program was operating under in 1960. The space race was not just a scientific competition. It was a political one, and every milestone was a message to the world about which system was stronger. The Soviet Union had shocked the West with Sputnik. It had reached the moon with Luna 2 in 1959. But the Americans were closing the gap, and Soviet leadership knew it. Inside that pressure cooker, the R-16 was being developed as a new intercontinental ballistic missile. It was a project of enormous strategic importance. Getting it operational ahead of schedule was not just a goal. It was a demand that came from the top. Marshal Mitrofan Nedelin, who commanded Soviet strategic rocket forces, was overseeing the R-16's test program personally. He was not an engineer. He was a military man, and he treated the missile program the way military men treat timelines, as something that bends to will. The R-16 used a highly toxic and unstable propellant. The protocols for handling it were not suggestions. They existed because the fuel itself was capable of igniting spontaneously under the wrong conditions. Engineers working on the program understood this. Several raised concerns in the days before the launch. The missile had experienced technical problems. A proper safety review would have meant delaying the test, possibly by weeks. Nedelin ordered the work to continue on the fueled rocket. He reportedly
A launchpad incident on October 24, 1960 would prove a setback that would remain a secret for decades, leaving the grieving families to hurt in silence. The Nedelin Catastrophe would become known as the single greatest disaster in the history of spaceflight, even worse than the Challenger and Columbia accidents.
Sat on a chair close to the launch pad to make it clear that stopping was not an option. Officers and engineers who might otherwise have insisted on a stand-down stayed at their posts because Nedelin himself was watching. On October 24, 1960, a premature ignition triggered the second-stage engines while the rocket was still on the pad. The fuel exploded. Men who were working directly on and around the missile died within seconds. Others who were standing further back were engulfed as the fire spread. The flames were fed by the toxic propellant, and the heat was intense enough that little remained of those caught closest to the blast. The death toll has been reported at over 70 people, including engineers, military officers, and technicians. Nedelin himself was among the dead. The disaster killed more people in a single event than any other launchpad accident in the history of spaceflight. What followed was a cover-up that the Soviet state executed with the same efficiency it applied to everything else it wanted hidden. The men who died were not acknowledged publicly. Their families were told different stories depending on their rank. The official line about Nedelin was that he had died in a plane crash. That was the version printed in state newspapers. That was the version Soviet citizens were expected to accept. The secrecy was not just about embarrassment. The R-16 was a military program, and the Soviets had no interest in letting the West know they had suffered a catastrophic failure on what was supposed to be their next major strategic weapon. Admitting the disaster would have handed the Americans both a propaganda victory and a detailed picture of how badly things had gone wrong inside the Soviet rocket program. Sergei Korolev, the lead Soviet rocket engineer and the central figure of the entire space program, knew what had happened. He had been present at Baikonur in the days surrounding the disaster, though accounts differ on exactly where he was at the moment of the explosion. Korolev died in 1966, and his identity as the chief designer had itself been a state secret during his lifetime. The Soviet program buried its failures and its heroes with equal consistency. For nearly 3 decades, the Nedelin Catastrophe existed only in the memories of survivors and the classified files of Soviet institutions. Engineers who had been there that day could not speak about it publicly. The men who died had no official memorial. Their names were not part of any public record of the space race. That changed in 1989. Under Mikhail Gorbachev's policy of Glasnost, which pushed for greater openness inside Soviet society, the disaster was finally acknowledged. Soviet publications confirmed what had happened on October 24, 1960. The scale of the deaths, the cause, the fact that safety procedures had been bypassed under direct pressure from a senior military commander, all of it came out. The Nedelin Catastrophe reframes the story of the space race in a way that official histories on both sides preferred to avoid. The Soviet Union's early successes were real, but behind them was a program that punished caution and rewarded speed above everything else. The cost of that culture was paid in full on a launchpad in Kazakhstan by men whose names the state spent 3 decades refusing to say out loud. Baikonur is still operational. Launches still take place from the same ground. But what happened there in 1960 is no longer buried, and the pressure that caused it was never unique to the Soviet Union. It was the pressure of a race where being second was treated as failure, and where the people closest to the danger had the least power to say stop.